Well, Beau, man, good to have you on the Books for Guys podcast. I am honored to talk with you man, leading up to this episode, I went on a deep dive of learning more about you and your father's work, and I was like, I don't even know where to
No,
start because you guys have done so much and so many different things. I was like, first thought, I was just like, what a life, just the things you guys have gotten to experience and the work that you put out there and just different avenues is just incredible. And I know, I want to hear your thoughts and just your experiences and just kind of where life's taken you. And again, I had to reread too the stat of your father, I think has what is it, 300 million copies of work in print globally?
probably somewhat more than that. In the very early days of paperbacks, they didn't count very well, and so it could be more than that. The more impressive thing, however, is we're still in maybe the top 12 writers at Random House,
Yeah.
and maybe the top 50 writers in the world. And that's year on year. That's not cumulative. So
Yeah.
that means each year that we're kind of there. So we're kind of a low key success story. I hope something, I wish more people knew about us, but
Yeah.
there are plenty.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think that's part of the kind of the intrigue is that there is so much of y'all's work out there. But I was someone new that got introduced to your work and I'm reading books and looking at different things all the time. And then I saw what you guys have out there. I'm like, how have I never heard of Beau or Louis and the work that they've done? It's incredible. But no,
Most of my work is kind of behind the scenes, but my
yeah.
dad's certainly well known.
Yeah. Well, no, Beau, I'd love for you just to take the mic for a couple of minutes and just lead us into this a little bit because you've got a new book out, which I believe was released last week. Is that when
It came out on June 2nd.
okay, yeah. So last week, which is Skyring Water. And I know there's a unique part of this book because it's you and your father who have co-written it, but it's kind of in a way where you've taken some of the manuscripts and notes that he had and then you formulated it to finish it. Is that correct?
I've been doing that kind of work for quite a while. Even back when my dad was alive, I was both adapting and in charge of adapting his books in those days, we were doing audio dramas. So these are not just somebody reading the story. This is a full script and sound effects and music and the whole thing. And so I started off doing that. Over the years. I have edited a lot of his work. Sometimes that takes because some of it was unfinished, some of it was in great need of editing, some of it was unpublished and needed this or that. Sometimes that has been more or less rewriting. Recently, the last two novels that we brought out, I stuck my name on it just because people seem to start worrying about, well, kind of who did what? Is somebody behind the scenes doing this? Sort of, yes, me, it's just so it's out there for everybody to know.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, Beau, how did you talk a little bit about your story first? Because you grew up in California, and again, I was looking through your background, radio, magazines, editing, script writing, novels, but just kind of paint the picture for our guest of just who you are, your
Okay.
path of where that's led to today, especially with the release of this book. So just kind of the path you've taken and where you're at now.
Okay. So I grew up in Los Angeles. I particularly grew up in the West Hollywood area. West Hollywood, in the days when I lived there, which was in the 60s and early 70s, was kind of like Haight-Ashbury or the East Village. It was a very beatniky neighborhood. My dad was, in those days, a modestly successful but still struggling writer. He really I wouldn't say he broke into notoriety. He was already pretty well known, but I would say he broke into greater wealth and an easier life in the mid 1970s. He was pretty old before he was particularly successful. We moved to a much quieter and more conservative neighborhood in West Los Angeles. I went to LA public schools. I went to California Institute of the Arts, where I got a bachelor's of fine art with an emphasis in film. I was lucky enough to study with two really great mentors. CalArts works on a mentor system where you have a particular faculty member who's your primary contact. One of them was Alexander McKendrick, who is a great director, Scottish director from back in the 1950s, maybe one of the best film teachers alive at the time. I also studied with Ed Emshwiller, who had been an artist who did a lot of book illustrations in the 50s and 60s, and so we actually had a lot of connection because, we knew some of the same people. He was obviously, like 50 years older than me, but we knew some of the same people. And Ed also had done the first piece of digital animation in the world. He and Albie Ray Smith did a piece of digital animation called Sunstone. Smith went on to found Pixar quite a few years later. And so I had this kind of interesting background. It was kind of classic Hollywood, classic movie business, and also something that became the future, but none of us knew it was going to be the future yet. I went on to work in the motion picture business, did that on and off for quite a few years. It's still something that's a little bit part of my life occasionally. And then I went on to work in the earliest parts of the audiobook business when it moved from being like books for the blind to something that was more commercial. We did a lot of audio dramas. We did about 6 audio dramas a year. I really learned a lot about writing at that time. I also learned a lot about writing from studying acting, which I was doing at that time, not really because I wanted to become an actor, but because I was writing scripts for those audio dramas. And in my opinion, the first customer of your script is the actor. It's not really the audience yet, it's the actor. And so I felt like I needed to learn something there, learned quite a bit about writing doing that. It was a great chance to experiment. My dad passed away, had to reorganize our business from the books that he wrote, the 2 to 4 books that he wrote a year, into a business that was more backlist oriented, that took the whole catalog and was more about presenting the whole catalog as a unit. Did a lot of interesting marketing things somewhere I guess right around in the late 90s, early 2000s. We did a big marketing program where we gave about 1 million books to the US military. Did some other things. I've done a lot of I've art directed a lot of covers. I kind of had this background in general art from school. And so then did a graphic novel sort of following up in that same area, adapted from one of my dad's short stories and a script that I wrote with a terrific writer that we did a bunch of audio dramas together, Catherine Nolan. And then kind of got to the point where I think probably the most interesting thing I've done in the last decade or so, besides this book and the things that go with it, would be this Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures program, where we took many of my dad's notes and correspondence and all different kinds of sources, interviews that I did, and I wrote like the story behind the story for a whole bunch of his novels and things. So that's now in the new editions of those books, that's packaged with the novel as a postscript, almost like like the bonus features on a DVD or something. And then there were 2 books of material that didn't fit in with the novels. That's Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, volumes 1 and 2. Those were unfinished books and short stories of my dad that I explained how they worked into his life and what position they would have had. All of this project is sort of like let's call it the professional biography of Louis L'Amour, kind of organized by project. And that brings us up to Skyring Water. And I'll stop talking for a minute, let you ask some questions, and I can tell you anything you want to know.
No, I appreciate that. That's a lot of things that I learned. Obviously, as I was researching for this, seeing a lot of things you've done and just the path, I wanted to hear it from your own words on just kind of what that looked like. And it's really cool because it seemed like you and your dad were very close. There's a lot of correlation of work together. And I'm curious to know, like, you don't see that all the time, in a lot of ways. I think it's very cool that you got to experience a lot of this with your dad. And it seems like he had a really big influence on you and just the direction that you went as a creative person too. And what was that dynamic like? Like when you were a kid, is that what led you to wanting to go kind of that same path? I mean, what was your relationship with your dad like, and where did it seems like it was all good, but like what did that look like?
No, it was really an exceptional relationship. I didn't really imagine myself ever writing novels or anything of the sort. I kind of wanted to be a filmmaker or work in the more technical arts. I was very happy doing the audio dramas when that was going on because I like the technical side of things as well as the creative. And we worked together very well. My dad was very much of the guy who would have all of the genius ideas and get things started. He was always in love with starting a new project, and I'm much more the like I'm going to dot all the i's and cross all the t's and get the editing perfect and try to finish everything up, round everything up. So we're kind of a good complement for one another.
Yeah, that's what I was picking up on. You guys had like your own unique skill sets and interests, and it really balanced well it to where you guys were able to do so many of these cool things together. And again, you don't see that very often. I think a lot of times I'm just thinking of young men, you almost, we have good relationships with our dads, but sometimes we kind of defy them and we're, trying to create our own path. But you guys seem to have your own interest and it meshed well to where you guys were able to do some of these cool things and put this work together. What's something that you look back on and you're still continuing this work, but what's been the most, I don't know, the most enjoyable aspects of it and something that you kind of pinch yourself and you're like, I can't believe I got to do this.
Probably, two things very different from one another. The Law of the Desert Born graphic novel was a very charmed project. There was about 5 of us, the adapter, Charles Santino, and Thomas Yates, the illustrator, and myself. Paul Odell, who I've worked with for a long time, who's our webmaster, but also just handles a lot of the nuts and bolts technical stuff on our end, and Catherine Nolan, and all coming together to do this particular project and very much complementing one another, having a great time working with one another. And, Paul was doing kind of the electronic post production on that. And so, we'd find a panel where Thomas had moved like a character's pocket from like one side of his vest to the other. And Paul was like, oh, I can go in there and Photoshop and fix that. And, and then eventually we got to a point where Thomas would draw like several pockets for him and just send him the pockets so he could put them where he needed to put them if anything like that happened before. I don't know that that's an exact example, but that's the kind of thing that happened. And we all worked very, very well together. And the book is beautiful. And we were nominated for an Eisner Award, which is like a Academy Award in the comic book business. It was still back in the days when the Village Voice existed, and the Village Voice said it was one of the best. It was on one of those best of the year lists at the Village Voice and stuff like that. And so that was really terrific. And then, that was kind of working with a team. And then working solo, Skyring Water, this new book, is just something that has been a remarkable experience of just kind of diving into this adventure and almost, I mean, it's not like I didn't plan it out and everything, but
Yeah.
also almost experiencing the elements of the adventure along with the characters and kind of experiencing my dad's life because my dad wrote very much in a stream of consciousness kind of way, much more than I do. And just being able to go on this incredible adventure with these crazy characters, this pair of arms dealers who get in over their head and are chased around the world and move from Barcelona in the 1960s to Israel to Egypt to Venezuela and Argentina and Chile and have to recover this salvage this submarine. I mean, I created these challenges for myself that were kind of crazy. I mean, I said, okay, I have to break into it's like a locked room caper. I have to break into a submarine that is on the floor of this fjord in very cold water, and it's sealed and pressurized, and it's booby trapped too.
Yeah.
Okay. It's full of gas and explosives, but it's sealed and pressurized, and divers have to break into it without flooding it with water. And so I had, luckily I had some wonderful kind of submarine experts who helped me out and people who knew things about salvage and stuff like that. But throughout the process, we would discuss it and we would come up with a plan, and then we would suddenly go, "Oh no, there's a better plan. Here's another way of doing it." And I kind of incorporated those things into the story. So the mistakes we initially made planning are the mistakes the characters make.
Yeah.
And then they come up with better ways of doing things. So it was just a very exciting process of working out these stories that crisscross one another and the way the characters intertwine and the way the characters are, work out their problems.
Yeah, interesting. But I was thinking of another question for you, in particular about this book. Different books. I'm thinking of your dad just in general. Where do you think his creativity came from? Were they experiences, or how did he come up with his novels? Did you ever get the insight on just kind of like his world and how he created these stories?
Well, I think, people used to ask him, kind of where do your ideas come from and things like this. And he would always say, well, if I didn't have ideas, I wouldn't be in this business. But, some of it, I don't know that his experiences or mine really spark the plot of the story. They more fill in the details of what happens throughout it. But they are, you do get into this sort of what if, you know, situation. And you say, well, what if this? What if in this case, Skyring Water, what if the greatest treasure of the 20th century was abandoned and nearly forgotten at the end of World War II. And the few people who remembered that it existed didn't know where it was, but were forced to try and find it, and thus, either save the world by finding it or save the world by destroying it, depending on what interpretation you really want to look at. If a lot of it is just kind of asking yourself that question. I think if you don't have a lot of what if questions, you don't come up with story ideas. And then once you have that idea, your experiences start to fill in the the blanks and start to fill in the experiences of the characters and the way they react to one another. I think your life interacts with it more at that point, at least in the way that we work. You might find some writer who's definitely writing more from things they personally experienced and working out one version of it or another.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always curious, especially on like the fiction side of things. What's going on in your world at that time that may be influencing what you write about? And as you write, what external influences, even from start to finish on a novel, like what influenced you towards the end of the book that wasn't
Right,
influencing
right.
at the beginning, and what triggered this idea or this part of the story or this direction. And again, as a creative person, there's so many different ways you can come up with that, but I'm always curious of like the external impacts of things going on how that molds what you're putting, on pen to paper.
Well, in this case, I actually think a lot, COVID had a lot of impact on this book. So it's this big kind of globe-trotting book that moves around the world, and, of course, I was like stuck at home.
Yeah.
And so it was a chance to travel around. It also has a certain cynicism towards government and things like that. I mean, a lot of its cynicism is very rightly aimed at the government of the Third Reich, but it's also aimed at other governments, and the characters that it follows are arms dealers who are very cynical about the role that governments play and how what they're up to, and how they kind of have to ultimately redeem themselves throughout the process of the story. So there was some of that, and then some of it was also, it's set in 1961, which is the year that I was born, and I think we're all kind of fascinated by the conditions of the world that created us, but we weren't really aware of them because we were too young. My dad was born in 1908, and he wrote a lot of westerns, and so, he's looking at the world just before he was born, and kind of fascinated, maybe more by the era of his father's youth or his grandfather's youth. And so I'm looking at this, I knew a lot about this period because I've been studying a lot of my dad's life in order to write a biography. That's probably my next project. And my dad's career, the modern part of his career that we all kind of know about developed in the 1950s and 60s. And so I had some information on that, and I was very interested in that world. And so I guess that's how we get there.
Yeah. No, very interesting. Yeah, and I actually it's really cool you say that because I've found myself, especially more recently, thinking about events when I was born and just what things were like then. And maybe I don't know, maybe I'm just social media is wearing me out and I just want some nostalgia in a way, and I see these videos like what it was like in the 80s and the 90s. And I kind of remember a little bit of that. And I was like, man, times were so good, just hanging with your friends, riding your bike, going around the neighborhood, not telling your parents where you were going to the video store. And I was like, man, now I'm really interested. Like what was going on back then? Well, it's funny you say that.
Well, that's also, the book really grows out of a time period and a genre, so the Cold War thriller. So it's kind of like the grandfather of the Cold War thriller is kind of Ian Fleming writing James Bond. And then there's Ken Follett and Jean Le Carré and more modern people like Clive Cussler, all the way up to, I guess Cussler kind of takes you to the end of the Cold War. And it having read some of those books and loved them during that time period, I really wanted to do something that kind of fit into that, into that particular area. And it's fun. It's like there's like it's a world without cell phones. It's a world without the internet. It's a world without, almost without computers. There is a little bit the first computers in the world play a little role, a small role in this particular story. But it's a different place, and it's kind of, even thinking back to my 20s in the 1980s, it feels closer to this world, and I don't know, there's a lot of fun and nostalgia to it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I talk to people a lot about just how much we've progressed in the short amount of time. It's just different than what the progression was like 70s, 80s, 90s. It seemed a little slower. I don't know. I wasn't, conceptually all there then, but, knowing what I hear from others. But Boaz, have you gotten any early feedback on the book that maybe has surprised you a little bit as far as just, people reading it, then saying something about it? We're like, oh, I didn't actually think about that. Or that's interesting that you,
Not really, but we're only about a week into it,
yeah,
so it's
very early to get that. I know.
it's hard to tell. I also try to kind of distance myself from whatever is going on in the audience world. And I am obviously interested in getting out there and selling it and telling people that it's this wonderful, exciting book that's a thriller in every sense. But I haven't heard too much back yet.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I love that too, because most people I talk to, there's always, I don't know, someone usually reads it and says something where they're like, "Oh, it's very interesting. I'm glad you pointed something out that maybe I just didn't think about, with this story."
Listen, that's always true. I mean, talking about other projects. That is if you have a project, I've noticed this with a number of like film type projects and stuff. If you take a script or you take a short story or whatever it is and put it in front of somebody and don't tell them anything, just let them read it. And then the best feedback you can get is never, ever, ever in the world ask anybody if they liked it or not. It's totally unimportant. Get them to tell you the story. And what they come back with is sometimes just remarkable. It's remarkably different sometimes than what you expected you were going to hear. The good part about it is anything that you hear, use it because they think you created it. And
Yeah.
so it's like that's what the story was doing to them. So you should pay strict attention to that. I think tell me the story is the greatest critical input you could ever get.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, because 'cause I'm thinking again as your own creativity and your own world and your own thoughts, they're all so different from everyone else's, and so the way you've put together this world or this place that you're trying to describe, someone else may have a completely different way that they're creating it in their mind as they read it. That's the great thing about books, though, is you
Absolutely.
get to create your own storyline, not storyline, but your own world around it, your own imagination, your own thoughts of what this person looks like or where they're at and what they're experiencing. It's really
Absolutely.
cool.
The audience is one half of the creative experience, and it's really remarkable because of that.
Yeah. Bo, just a couple more questions for you. For this book
Sure.
in particular, what are you hoping? Is there a message? Is there an experience? What are you hoping people take away from reading the book?
I just hope people have a lot of fun with it. It's supposed to be exciting and surprising, and I'm hoping people are getting that out of it, and I'm hoping that they're transported to other places, and I'm hoping that I've written a well enough layered, kind of deep enough, detailed enough story so that they will be able to read it several times and continue to get continue to get more out of it. That's always my goal, is to create something that you can do a couple of times and kind of go, "Oh, wait a minute. That's what that was. I enjoyed the story, but now that I'm reading it again, I'm getting more out of it." And so I hope I've created something that somebody can react to that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I had another question for you too. I was going to kind of ask on like what some of maybe your work in progress is. It sounds like maybe a biography of your father is in the works on potentially something of a project. But Bo, last question for you. I ask everyone who comes on the podcast this question. It's really just a books for guys question of I'm always
Sure.
curious to know what people are interested in or what good recommendations are out there because everyone seems to give something different. But I'm curious to know, Bo, what is a book or two that has meant a lot to you personally or professionally? And what's a book that you love to recommend to other people?
That's difficult because a lot of my reading, particularly recently, has been nonfiction, and it's been just reading for for the information. But I would say if it's a books for guys question, it's like, what are the good books for guys?
Which all of
Mid
your
to
book and your father's books are by far good books for guys.
absolutely,
I'm working on getting
absolutely.
all of them on the website, by the way. I've got the new one on there,
Wonderful.
working on getting them all on there. So,
That would be great. That
yeah,
would be
we're
great.
we're on that. It should be done soon.
So I think the big books for guys question is mid to late 20th century popular literature. Okay. Robert Heinlein, Ross MacDonald, my dad, Elmore Leonard. These are great books to read. They're fast reads. They're a lot of fun. They were really written for more for with a I don't know that they were really written with a male audience in mind, but I think a lot of times when you look at what's popular literature out today, it's very female oriented. And this was back in the days when, you had a lot of guys running things, and the material had that quality. It's not like there weren't women doing interesting things like Patricia Highsmith and people like that, but there's a lot of great reading experiences, fun recreational reading experiences that I think fit a modern guy's profile, which is, a tight, tough read that is really good. So I'd say start around 1930 or 1940, maybe 1940 is a little bit better, and just like go all the way up through maybe the mid 90s. Anything that came out in paperback, you're gonna have fun with. And those are also good. A lot of that reading is good for younger, for teenagers too. And it doesn't have this problem that you see in the book business today, where everything's siloed into this, like, oh, this is for tweens, this is for this level reading, this is for that level reading. Because what happens is as your kid grows older, those writers stick in those categories, and then they have to change writers, and they have to change everything they do. So it's just better to lock into something and get going with it.
Yeah. And we could have a whole nother discussion on how things are set up today from a marketing and publishing standpoint. You get a lot of, I've learned a lot of those processes and how things are siloed a little bit. But I love your recommendations, Bo, because I think we're always on to like the next new thing. And sometimes it's good for us to take a break and go back a little bit and read and kind of just explore different worlds and different people who have written in different times and kind of just open yourself up a little bit more to learning about just different things in that time. Because again, we get so caught up on just what's now, what's next, technology, and that again, I promote reading. And so I love that you recommended those books in particular because it's easy to recommend a personal development book or something, something of that nature
Yeah.
today. But fiction seems to be so important, especially at a young age, for guys to get hooked on reading. As it's just,
Gosh,
yeah, it is. I'm actually talking with someone later this week who's really deep dived into that situation. I'm fascinated to learn more of just the studies
let
around
me
that.
let me jump in here and say this.
Yeah.
I think the loss of fiction reading in young people, particularly young men, it stunts the imagination. In other words, if you don't practice turning the code of English language into an imaginary process, an enjoyable imaginary process, you're not developing the mental muscles that will be able to turn that around and say, invent something. Okay. So it's basically you engage in this imaginary process where you're inspired by what you're reading to imagine things. And that is exercise for your taking your own imagination and putting that back in the world, creating some piece of computer code or a 3D item, a watch or, piece of electronic equipment, whatever it is. But your imagination has to be trained to do that. And I think that in turning off that aspect or turning it down, I don't think things like movies necessarily turn it off, but they really turn it down.
No, I agree, and I'm so glad you said that. And that again, it's a big reason behind books for guys is just promoting that imagination and that development and the curiosity and just getting your brain turning and interested in things and curious about things. As I don't know, it's just so easy to get dumbed down and just doing these repetitive entertainment things where it doesn't give you enough to think about or to just critically dive into. And so I love that you said that. And again, I'm interested to learn more and promote more about that, especially fiction books, because they do seem to be so important, especially at that young age for development. And, I look back at it now. I'm so glad that and I enjoyed reading, but I'm so glad I had people in my life that really took notice and really encouraged me to read. And I didn't do enough of it by any means, but I at least wasn't totally away from it. And, like some kids today seem to be, and it's like, "Oh, man, what are we doing? We've gotta get back to this," and highlight the importance of it. And so I really appreciate that aspect and your thoughts on that, Bo. But man, this has been amazing. Again, as coming into this conversation with you, Bo, I was looking at all these different things that you and your father have done. I was just like, man, I cannot wait to just learn more. And obviously, we've got the new book on the website. I'm working on getting all the others on there too to promote them.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and we're proud to do that. And we're proud to spotlight you and your father's work, and can't wait to see your future work, and we're gonna be proud to spotlight that too. And when you get your next books out there, we'll have you back on the podcast and talk
I
about
think
those.
that'd be great. I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, Bo, thank you, man. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.